With so many voices pulling at us in every direction, some are obviously really wrong, some are obviously really right, some might be louder, others are faint, some are just downright confusing. But let me just tell you, there is one voice that can make the most difference in our lives. Listen to this episode as I explain. There are many voices competing for our attention. Which voice do you listen to and which voice do you agree with? The one who came to steal and destroy, or the one who came to give life abundantly? Don't ever let the enemy steal your voice. Always choose the voice of truth. Listen and believe. I believe there is a deep connection between the voices we listen to and how we use our voice, how we actually show up in the world. Let me explain. When our thoughts are based on the truth, the voice of God, His truth about us, we will show up much differently in the world. We will be much more likely to use our voice for good. However, the opposite, the antithesis is true, because when we don't listen to His truth about us, we are much more likely to allow the enemy to silence us. Maybe it's because we're telling ourselves a lie. Maybe that we're just not willing to use our voice for a reason. Using your voice for good can come across in lots of different ways. It could just be as simple as speaking up for yourselves or for others. It could be telling your story when it really needs to be heard. It could be correcting a wrong. It could be having a hard conversation that you've put off. It could be sharing the gospel. It could be helping someone else to use their voice and tell their story. It could just be being a safe place to hear someone's story and speaking up for them. And speaking up for those who don't have a voice, like victims of trafficking and abortion. Do you feel voiceless? Is it possible that we hide our voice and that's what makes us feel voiceless? Where in your relationships do you use your voice? And where in our relationships do we lose our voice? Have you silenced yourself? Have I silenced myself? Or have we been silenced? Have we allowed it? Trauma often causes us to be silent in areas of life. It can cause us to disconnect in the very areas that we need connection. There's at least 3 reasons why we don't use our voice. One of those is that we silence ourselves by our own self-talk and self-sabotaging. The second one is that we silence ourselves through people-pleasing. And the third one is that we either allow or others silence us by not attuning to us. So for the first one, we silence ourselves by our own self-talk and self-sabotaging. Here's some thoughts on that. Is my inner critic too loud? Is my inner critic the loudest voice that I hear? If so, we will find ourselves being critical of not just ourselves, but others as well. Good news is that as we heal, we become less critical, much more compassionate of ourselves and others. So how would this play out? Example is, if you don't think you can do something and you keep telling yourself on repeat over and over, I can't, eventually you kind of get stuck in that belief. You've self-sabotaged. And then you may feel that you're stuck in procrastination. And what is the actual cost of listening to that voice of I can't? It's what may be causing your inaction. Procrastination itself is often a trauma response. Remember, there is good news that we can heal from this. And as we do, we may find ourselves slowly needing to create bridge thoughts, little tiny thoughts, little bite sized thoughts that we tell ourselves that we can do whatever it is we're trying to do. Look for evidence that we can do it and remind ourselves. We just get to remind our brain, retrain our brain that we can do it. And then we get rid of those little sneaky thoughts that are holding you back. Remember, we are responsible for our own thoughts, and we're the ones that get to take them captive. No one else. They also don't get to take us captive. Such a twist, right? Make sure that we are taking our thoughts captive. That's the right angle. We don't ever want to give that power away to anyone else or to something such as procrastination or shame, because shame also causes paralysis. Are you holding on to something that maybe you've already been forgiven for? Or maybe you still need to ask forgiveness. Go ahead and ask for it. And allow yourself to walk in freedom of forgiveness, letting go of any shame that was attached to that, and moving forward, giving yourself better self-talk, taking those thoughts captive, and proceeding where you need to use your voice. This is using your voice for good. So when we do this, then we get to ask yourself, which voice am I going to agree with? The one who forgave me? The one who came to give me life abundantly? Or the one who came to steal and destroy and keep me captive in unforgiveness? I always want to encourage you to listen to the voice of truth. That's where your freedom is. That's where joy is. Are you silencing yourself by keeping yourself in your comfort zone? That may feel like procrastination, but it also may just simply be that that is how our brain is designed. It likes to keep us safe, to keep us free of pain, to keep us from spending any energy, and also to seek pleasure. So sometimes this comfort zone can actually end up being more painful than the future that God has for us, because that's where we feel stuck. And the only way out of that is to trust Him and to step out in faith, walk by faith, not by sight. Listen to Him as He leads you and take the first step, which often is our thoughts. Right back to that. So speak up to yourself first. Give yourself those life-giving thoughts, the thoughts that line up with what He says about you. Speak up to you and see how that affects your feelings and your actions. I think you're going to be amazed. I know it's made a tremendous difference in so many of my clients' lives. The second area that people often give up their voice for is people pleasing. This is really common. It's a lot more common than we probably talk about it yet, but it is a way that we lose our voice. I believe there's going to be more on this in a future episode as I continue to study it, but for the purpose of this episode, I want you to just know that anytime we agree with others around us just for the sake that we want them to think a certain way about us or act a certain way, we are people pleasing. And that hides our truest self and our voice. It does not mean that we want to be disagreeable, quite the opposite. Of course, we always love peace, right? And want relationships to be the best as possible. But the way for them to be the best is not to hide our true self. It's for us to walk in our true self in ways that honor us, honor the person we're in relationship with, and of course, honor God. In essence, when we people please, we are actually manipulating them into a false relationship with us. They don't really get the pleasure of knowing who we truly are or having a genuine relationship with us. This, can happen for a variety of reasons, but always be curious if you find yourself feeling like you're people pleasing. I want to give you a lighthearted example that you can think on to see if it sounds familiar at all to you. Have you ever felt like when you're all getting ready to go out to eat and we're talking about where we're going to go, and you automatically, when asked where you want to go out to eat, you start thinking of everybody else's responses and you realize, oh, well, let's see, that one likes this food and this one doesn't like this restaurant and this one really prefers such and such. So I'm going to give that answer. Instead of saying, guess what, guys? I want sushi tonight. Well, guess what? Your family may not even realize that you love sushi if you never take the opportunity to use your voice. And it doesn't mean to ignore all those other voices telling you, oh, the wants and desires of everyone else in the car. We want to consider all of that. But remember, it is also okay for you to tell what you would like and to share your desires, your true desires as well. I think this is very common with a mama, especially if you have several children and maybe you're just trying to keep the peace because you know that like everyone has different things that they like and you don't want to come across selfish. That's not the goal at all. But you do want to come across genuine, authentic, and to make sure that your voice is heard as well. So it's probably really a matter of keeping the balance. There'll be times that you have to just go with the flow, of course, but there's going to be other times that you might want to just say, you know what, guys, I think it's my turn to choose and share what it is that is your heart's desire. So let's rid ourselves of self sabotage, of negative self talk, of people pleasing when it's at all possible, and let's agree to speak to ourselves in a way that lines up with God's thoughts about us. Let's agree to use our voice for good. If you aren't doing this, be really curious and ask yourself, why am I speaking to myself in a way that prevents me from using my voice or could even be harmful? Why am I not taking my thoughts captive so I can use my voice for good for myself and others? Be curious with yourself. Maybe you have some unhealed trauma. Maybe there's a deeper reason. Definitely spend some time investigating that and, if necessary, healing from that. Get the help that you may need. Because if your voice has been silenced or is being silenced by someone else, you definitely want to resolve that in a way that is best for everyone involved. We always want to listen to what God says about us above what anyone else says. So if someone speaks to you and it doesn't line up with what God says of you, always question that. Ask yourself, can I introduce what they're saying to me with, oh, my dear and delightful one, as if it's coming from God? If not, this may be a whole situation that needs much more attention and healing on a much deeper level. Please seek help. If this casting crown song, The Voice of Truth, comes to my mind when thinking on the voice of truth. But the giant's calling out my name, and he laughs at me, reminding me of all the times I've tried before and failed. The giant keeps on telling me time and time again, boy, you'll never win. You'll never win. But the voice of truth tells me a different story. The voice of truth says, do not be afraid. And the voice of truth says, this is for my glory. Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. This last line is so important. I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. As we heal, we become emotionally resilient. It starts with our thoughts and the voice we listen to. So let's start there. What are some thoughts you have that may be silencing your own voice? And what is something that you would really like to say if someone handed you the megaphone? Think on those and journal those. And I'm going to give you a little peek behind the scenes. This podcast is actually part of how I use my voice to share hope with you and how I help others do the same as they tell their stories here with you. Please pass this along to someone today.